Good afternoon, everyone. We are now in the book of Exodus, chapter 32. We left off in chapter 31 in a very important event. In chapter 31 and in verse 18, after, or what we say, at the end of that discussion that God had with Moses, he gave Moses two tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written with the finger of God. And we would call this the divine tablets, as written on both sides of each of the tablets. We begin in chapter 32. It says now, and that would be and then. After this particular event, after receiving the two tablets from God, now we don't know how long thereafter, but we do know that shortly there, the story turns from the top of the mountain. And so, if you recall, the discussion is always this way. The top of the mountain was where Moses and God would have been. At the top of that mountain, it would be covered with thick clouds, I think we could say that. And so Moses was up there and the people was down there. So now the story in chapter 31 was up at the mountain. Chapter 32 begins down there. And so I just we have to be very clear as the storytelling shifts from the top of Mount Sinai to the bottom of Mount Sinai. In chapter 32, it says, when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain. Now, this word delayed is a very peculiar word. It's not our regular English word, delay. Uh, you can think of it very much as a loss of hope, loss of hope. It is a state of uh, disappointment. It's a very peculiar word because they were expecting Moses to come back, but he didn't show up. That is that description here. This word, it's not so much as delayed. The the people uh, could not see Moses coming down, and for whatever the reason, they were confounded. They were disappointed. They were conflicted. Now, what is so important about Moses? I think we have to understand that. Moses is seen as an Elohim. Please bear in mind this word Elohim is actually a regular word, but it's a word that could be used as a name for the Creator God. It is also a role. That would be something that we may have to be clear about. Uh, you can actually see that God made Moses as Elohim first to Aaron, and so you read this in Exodus chapter 4 and in verse 16. You could also read this in Exodus chapter 7 and in verse 1. In both cases, God made Moses Elohim. So please do not always think that when you read the word Elohim, it has to be God. It's not. Elohim is a Hebrew word that describes a person as someone with great power. It is an elevated status. Uh, for example, Paro or Pharaoh is an Elohim to his people. And so God made Moses Elohim to Aaron. And so that Aaron becomes the prophet, the mouthpiece. And God will speak through Moses, and Moses will be perceived or seen as someone with great power. But we know that that power comes from God. The speech that needs to be said was also from God, but through Moses and spoken through the mouth of Aaron. So, in these cases, I hope that we would understand that Moses is seen as the leader of the Israelites. As Pharaoh is to the Egyptians, Moses is to the people of Israel. They cannot see God personally, but they do know that Moses is related to God in a very intimate way. And that is why they told Moses, "You go up. We cannot deal with God." Exodus chapter 19. Then they heard God speak. And so in Exodus chapter 24, Moses went up to the mountain and left Aaron as the representation to stand before the people. From chapter 24 or 25 all the way to chapter 31 records all that has been discussed by God to show to Moses what he wants done in his house. So, his house, his rules. And God's people must follow God's rules. But the people is now down there at the base of Mount Sinai, and Aaron was there. Moses didn't come back as planned. Now, how long was Moses missing? Well, it perhaps many people will say it was the same day, but they just couldn't wait after 40 days, perhaps. So the people gathered together to Aaron. Why Aaron? Because Aaron was left there as the leader. He was the prophet to Moses to speak on behalf of Moses, the Elohim, and said this to him: "Come, make us," and this word here is Elohim. Make us Elohim. It should not be translated as gods. Make us Elohim that shall go before us, for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And right here, I think we need to bear in mind the request was to make us Elohim. And what was this Elohim? The replacement of Moshe, of Moses. They were not replacing God. Hebrew people are Eastern people, and they need something that they can see, touch, feel, very concrete. And they could see Moses. Well, granted that behind Moses was a lot of powers, but they had seen Moses. And so Moses is treated as Elohim. So since they don't have Moses, why don't we make a Moses, or make an equivalent of a Moses? Since Moses was the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, then they need someone to go before us to lead us into the promised land. Next comes the strange story, and Aaron said to them, "Okay, break off the gold earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." Aaron wasn't thinking much, perhaps, and so he had suggested golden earrings. So note the word gold is very important. Anything for the purposes of justice or judgment, it's gold. And so they wanted to make Elohim who is just and using gold earrings. And so the people broke off the gold earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Moses. Now, I like to point out that when it says all the people, I would say that it's not 100% of the people. Usually, this terminology is majority, right? The majority, because later on, they would also bring their earrings to be used for the tabernacle. Aaron received the gold from their hand and fashioned it. Now, this word fashioned it with an engraving tool. Fashion is to shape it. Engraving tool is, well, because the word here is like a chisel, a stylus, a chisel. And then he made what we call a molten calf. Now, this word molded literally means a molded, a molten image. Molten means it would take gold and put it into a little mold, right? Into a little mold. And gold would be poured into the mold. And then out will come, well, I suppose a little, they call it a calf, right? A calf. By calf, we are we actually mean calf as a baby or a small animal, a child of an ox. But it is in a form of an ox. And it is all what we will call gold, right? It's all gold. The other aspect that we need to understand is that this word calf looks something like that. This is a calf. And it is chiseled out. Now, I want to point out that Aaron is not an artisan, meaning he's not that specialist who can make beautiful uh, images, beautiful things. He doesn't have that artistic flair because later on, God will endue certain people with power to do those things. And so, how is it that we see Aaron doing something like that? And so, this would be a very, should we say, a very slipshod, a very simple, simplistic little image of a calf. Now, understand the word Elohim comes from the word El, and El in ancient Hebrew is the head of an ox and a shepherd's staff. And so we have the Aleph, and then we have the Lamed. Basically, I guess the ancient letters equivalent to the Aleph and the Lamed. Now, why am I saying this? Is because I want to point out to you that the ox head right here, this picture here, is represented by the calf. And that is the symbol of Elohim. Just like Jeroboam, right? He made two calves, one in Bethel and one in Dan. The idea of a calf, as opposed to any other image, because the people couldn't be bothered, right? They only said, "Make me Elohim." And Aaron was the one who decided what that would be. And in his mind, perhaps it is a symbolic representation of Elohim. Meanwhile, Moses wasn't around, and maybe when Moses comes back, then this would not be there anymore. It's like the people wanting to see Moses, but since they can't see Moses, he didn't come back. Uh, well, this Elohim little golden calf would be good enough. And Aaron tried to fashion something, chisel it out, made this calf from melting the gold and doing this. And after he presented to them, the people said, now this is a bit tricky. I want to show you. It says, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. The text has a bit of a challenge. It should say, these are your Elohim. Now, in this case, Elohim is not used in the singular. Right now, it is used in the plural because of this demonstrative pronoun that it's not this, but it's these. So it's these are your Elohim, Israel. And so the commentators will say that this people, they would be some of the mixed multitude, throwing in besides the molten golden calf, there would be others. And so that would be a way of describing what really happened, right, at this point in time. So it is not just what Aaron had made, but it was Aaron plus the other ones that they brought out from Egypt. Verse 5, in this chapter, we would see a number of really strange things happening, particularly with Aaron. So we want to actually examine what did Aaron do? Verse 5 reads, and then as Aaron saw it. What is it? Well, I think it's not just the calf, but now the suggestion was that these people had brought other Elohim, right? Other Elohim. Now, what does that mean? These are the Elohim from Egypt. We see this way that he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation to say this: tomorrow it is a feast to the Lord. So we need to explain this. Now, we're a bit slow in chapter 32, of which we would probably not be able to finish the chapter today. But I think this chapter has enough details that we need to resolve so that we have a better idea before we enter into chapter 33. Aaron actually saw what was happening, and then he built an altar to his faces. Now, this is interesting. As he saw all the Elohim, the one that he made was this one. This is made by Aaron, the golden calf. And he wants to use this as to shape their minds back to Jehovah. This is a feast, a celebration. This is the word. It says, tomorrow it is a celebration to Jehovah. Jehovah is the Elohim who brought them out of Egypt. It appears that Aaron is beginning to see that things are starting to get out of control. Today is the day he made this golden calf, and they had put all of these golden calves together. Now, is that true? Whether there were other Elohim, Not quite sure, but it is suggested. That is what some of the mixed multitude would have done. In reshaping their focus to Jehovah, he introduced tomorrow as a feast. Now, this would be the first time they actually had a celebration after coming out. Now, the first instance they were very pleased was after coming past the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf, the Red Sea, we call it. And thereafter, there was nothing else. Nothing that deserves a feast. Now, this is what feast is, to celebrate, to really jump around. Verse 6. And then they rose early the next day, which is the tomorrow, offered burnt offerings, peace offerings. The people sat down and to eat and drink. And then he says to rose up to play. I think this is another difficult translation. They they rose up to make merry. To make merry, right? This word to play. They sat down to eat and drink. After they ate and drink, and then they stood up and made merry. Now, what does make merry mean? The idea of making merry uh, is to laugh, uh, to play around, to jest around, and some would suggest that that merriment might have include uh, even mocking, right? Even mocking. And thereby, if that would be the case, then you find that certain people who are not very happy with Moses and Jehovah would actually chime in to deride God. Now, this is probably the area where we just have to pay a little bit more attention, because the translation to rise up to play doesn't really signify very much unless you understand that they stood up and some of them tended to mock God. I would tend to suggest that that is the case, because right after this statement, then we find this new statement in verse 7. And then Jehovah said to Moses, we now move from verse 6 here back up to verse 7. It's back up to the mountaintop. It says to Moses, walk down. Now, this all obviously, whenever we see the word walk, it is to tell Moses to move, right? And the walk is a very powerful term. It's to walk, to move, to start the journey, to go down from the hill for your people. Notice, it's quite interesting because it is your people, because they see Moses as Elohim. And oftentimes, when God is angry, it's telling Moses, your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. The idea of corrupting themselves is also interesting, because I think we should learn a little bit of this word. The idea of corrupt is to bring themselves to a ruin. I think you can call it that way. It is to pervert, right? Pervert. Pervert means you have the right thing, but there are certain things that you tend to twist it a little bit. Was it not God who brought them out of the land of Egypt? Yes, Elohim, Jehovah. But then again, if you look at it from the human perspective, the people's perspective, they see Moses, Moshe, as the Elohim. And that was what God had also said, these people is looking at it from a human viewpoint and have forgotten about the God behind Moses. Your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have perverted themselves. They have taken what is right and twisted a little bit here and there, and it's all confused. God continues to say, they have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. Turn aside means turn away from the conduct, from the way of life which I have instructed them. God has said, do not make any images before me. Nothing in the heaven above or the skies above, the land below, or under the land where there is water, which would be the fishes, the sea creatures. Don't make any images. Well, they have made themselves a molded calf and has bowed down to it. Now, this word is bowed down, prostrated. The next word here is sacrifice to it. Sacrifice means uh, kill an animal and make as an offering, right? As an offering. And so, whenever we talk about this burnt offering and peace offering, they did it at the altar to Elohim. So the question would be very important. Elohim is akin to the English word God, as is commonly used. And because God is also a generic word, then what God are we talking about? What Elohim are we talking about? Which God did you make offering to? Right here, right? It is a feast to Jehovah. But when you brought out burnt offerings and peace offerings, what did you offer to? It was to this Elohim, right? This was the Elohim. Although everyone is called an Elohim, then in our study of the passage, we need to know whether it is with regards to this Elohim or God as the Elohim up there, or Moses as the Elohim. And since this little golden calf represents Moses, this is important. And God continues to say that they said, this is your Elohim, your Elohim. O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So God actually did say that, right? Your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt. So you brought out of the land of Egypt. Elohim, Jehovah, that is his name, was the one who brought them out of Egypt, but through the hand of Moshe, seen as Elohim of the people. And so the people is seeing Moses as Elohim. And so making that golden calf in their mind is a justifiable representation. And Aaron didn't think too much about that. But what God was upset is because they had bowed down and made offering where he told them not to. Even though this represented Moses, that is the wrong Elohim. In Exodus chapter 20, the Elohim is Jehovah Elohim, not Moshe Elohim, not any other Elohim. And then Jehovah said to Moses, I have seen this people, your people, and indeed is a stiff-necked people. Now, this is another word that we can learn from. This word stiff-necked is quite interesting. Uh, you, I think you could find that this word uh, literally means something very stiff and very not bendable, right? It is correct. It's a stiff neck, not bending. And thereby, it means obstinate. Uh, in, in, in Chinese, we have a similar word uh, like this. We say a person who refuses to listen to good advice, uh, however much you try to advise the person, you call the person very ngang gang, very hard neck, or very stiff neck. And this essentially is the identical thought to the Chinese word. So this people is very stiff necked. You can tell them 100 times, and they tend not to listen very closely. In verse 10, it is very important. Now, it says, now, let me alone. Now, this is I think this is a slightly difficult word to translate. The, the English word is let me alone. But the idea here is really uh, don't disturb me. I think it would be a better way. So don't disturb. It does convey an idea of no, let God be, right? Let me be. Don't disturb me. Now, that would be the expression here. It's not let me be alone. I don't want anyone to talk to me. The idea here is not because God wants to be alone. God doesn't want to be interrupted because he's now in a course of judgment that he needs to do something, and that something is caused by his wrath. And so he says that my wrath may burn hot against them, that I may consume them. Now, this is an important aspect to follow. It says, my wrath may burn hot. The word wrath really means nose. In a physical imagery, when somebody becomes very angry, the nostrils will flare and it will turn red. And that means the person is angry. The other word that is attached to it to describe it more is the verb burn hot. Burn hot means think about the nose catching fire. It's ablazed. Now, when the nose is just red, he's just angry. When the nose is catching fire, uh, it just gives us a picture of the intensity of the wrath, right? It's the intensity of the wrath. The wrath or anger is directed to them. Who is them? The them is this stiff necked people. That's the them. This them. Stiff necked people that I may consume them. Now, because the picture is giving us is in the picture of a fire burning in the nose, that God says that I may consume them. Now, this word consume literally means put an end. Now, this is a very specific word. This word in verse 10 also carries the meaning to annihilate. It is a very serious term. To consume them is actually a very simplistic term. It is to put an end to this people. When you hear God say, put an end to this people, it means that these stiff necked Israelites, they should not live anymore. I want to end this problem by ending these people. That is what this word, uh, akalem, or to put a completion, put an end to all this. That would be that word. So I'm trying to express in this way so that we appreciate how angry God is. It's very hard for us to understand why would God get so angry. God brought them out of Egypt. 10 miracles, the final one being the death of the firstborn. Very, very crucial. Cross the Red Sea, complain. Water, bitter water became sweet water. Complain again that there was no food and there was bread from heaven. God is very patient with them until now. Until this point in time where they have perverted themselves, they have corrupted themselves. This idea is very important. They perverted some of the words, instructions, and they follow some, but they don't follow others, and they do it in a way where it is not what God had wanted. It's been perverted, and God says, I'm done with them. How many times do I have to tell them these are stiff-necked people? And God says to Moses these words, I want to end them, and I will make of you a great nation. A great nation means, again, a nation that's powerful, that is also numerous. Right? That's what it means. Powerful and numerous. Now, God is expressing his anger, and God is expressing his intent. Please bear in mind, God is a faithful God. And God's faithfulness is by his words, demonstrated by the words of God, that he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that their descendants will inherit the land. We're here at this point in time where they are called a stiff-necked nation, bowing down to the molten golden calf, or making offerings and lying down prostrating, calling that this is the Elohim that brought them out of Egypt, likely as an equivalent to Moses, misrepresenting Moses, in fact. And God is absolutely angry that they're not supposed to make anything image, and they did. And so God says, I don't want them anymore. I'll start again with you, Moses. Now, Moses is from the tribe of Levi, a Levite, and also a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if that's the case, yes, God says, I will start again with Moses. Be done away with these stiff-necked people. Kill them all, and I can do it again. And that was what God was bent to do, because he was absolutely flabbergasted, absolutely angry. So you can talk about it in the sense that, the fire from the nose that's burning is making God very, very displeased with this people that God calls your people, the people of Moses, who is the Elohim to them, who brought them out of Egypt. Now, this in itself is crucial for us to understand, uh, because God can get angry. God got angry as they behaved wrongly. God wouldn't get angry if they had behaved correctly. God is not about to give them what we call opportunities to do wrong. Why? Because they have seen the power of God. And yet they can behave this way. So they are called stiff necked. How many times must God show his power to them for them to really embrace Jehovah Elohim? That's the $1 million question. And yet, at this point in time, a golden calf was manufactured to replace Moses. It says, this is that Elohim who brought you out of the land of Egypt as a representation of Moses. And God says, absolutely not. This is the kind of people that he can do without. It is so difficult to deal with these people. Moses, I like you. You are obedient to me. Let me restart my plan with you. And if that plan, starting with Moses, succeeds, God is still faithful because they are still the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the land will be given to them. Now, we will come to an end right here, but understand that in the rest of the chapter, you find that Moses is a very different kind of a leader. He is not the leader that says, oh, great, now let's do it my way. No, not at all. I want you to go back to read the rest of chapter 32 to understand the kind of leader that Moses truly is. That he is a leader who places God's interest at heart, not the people's interest, God's interest at heart. So if you want to know a man after God's own heart, this would be one, a very early David, if you want to call it that way. That Moses is truly seen by God as a true prophet and a friend, because Moses only had God's interest at heart. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.